How many of you sitting here today would jump in front of a moving train to save your child's life? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. Now keep those hands up if you would do the same to save yourself. That deafening silence in the room, that subtle shift of discomfort in your seats, that's exactly why we need to have this conversation today. That's why what I'm about to share with you might be the most important message you'll ever hear about love, about parenting, and about the greatest gift you can give your children. A parent who truly, deeply, and completely loves themselves first. I know what some of you are thinking right now. I can feel the resistance, the judgment, maybe even the anger bubbling up. How dare he suggest we should love ourselves more than our children? What kind of parent would even think such a thing? I've seen that look before in mirrors and audiences across this country. But stay with me, because what I'm about to share isn't about loving your children less. It's about loving yourself more, and through that transformation, loving your children better than you ever thought possible. Let me share something personal with you. Back in 1975, when I was still practicing as a counselor, a young mother came to my office. Her name was Sarah, and she was living what seemed like the perfect life. 3 beautiful children, a successful husband, a gorgeous home in the suburbs. But behind that picture, perfect facade, was a woman so depleted, so empty, that she could barely get out of bed each morning. She told me something I'll never forget. I've given everything to my children, every ounce of energy, every moment of time, every drop of love. And now I have nothing left. Not for them, not for myself, not for anyone. That moment changed my life, my understanding of love, and my entire approach to personal development. Because what Sarah didn't realize, what so many of us don't realize, is that you cannot give what you don't have. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And most importantly, you cannot teach your children to love themselves if you don't know how to love yourself first. When you're on an airplane, what does the flight attendant tell you about oxygen masks? Put your own mask on first before helping others. Why? Because if you pass out trying to help someone else, you both lose. Yet how many of us are trying to parent while emotionally unconscious, spiritually depleted, and mentally exhausted? What message do you think you're sending to your children when you constantly sacrifice your own well-being for theirs? When you skip meals to drive them to activities, when you give up your dreams to fund theirs, when you deny your own joy to ensure theirs? You might think you're teaching them about love and sacrifice, but what you're really teaching them is that it's noble to deny your own worth. You're teaching them that self-neglect is a virtue. You're showing them that when they become parents, they too should erase themselves. I remember working with a father in Detroit. Let's call him James. He came to one of my seminars proud of the fact that he hadn't taken a vacation in 12 years because he was saving every penny for his children's college fund. He worked 60-hour weeks, missed his own doctor's appointments to attend his kids' soccer games, and hadn't read a book or pursued a hobby in years. He thought he was being a good father. But when I asked him what his children said they wanted most in the world, his face crumbled. They said they wish I wasn't so tired all the time. They said they missed the dad who used to laugh and play with them. You see, what James didn't understand, what so many of us don't understand, is that our children don't need our sacrifice. They need our presence. They don't need our martyrdom. They need our joy. They don't need our exhaustion. They need our energy. And they don't need our guilt-ridden love. They need our wholehearted overflow from a full cup love. But here's where it gets really interesting and perhaps a bit uncomfortable. The reason we find it so hard to love ourselves first isn't because we love our children too much. It's because we don't truly understand what love is. We've confused love with sacrifice, martyrdom with devotion, and self-denial with good parenting. Let me share a truth that might shake your core. Your children don't want your sacrifice. They want your light. They don't want your exhaustion. They want your energy. They don't want your guilt. They want your joy. And they don't want your constant attention. They want your peaceful presence. Think about the last time you were truly happy, truly at peace. How did your children respond to you in that moment? I bet they gravitated toward you like moths to a flame, because children are naturally drawn to light, to joy, to love. They don't want parents who dim their own light to make their children shine brighter. They want parents who shine so brightly that they light up the path ahead. But somewhere along the way, we got it twisted. We started believing that good parenting meant putting our children's needs above our own in every situation. We started wearing our exhaustion like a badge of honor, our sacrifice like a crown of thorns. We started competing with each other over who could give up more of themselves for their children. And in doing so, we've created a generation of parents who are running on empty, who are trying to fill their children's cups while their own souls are parched with thirst. We've created a paradigm where self-love is seen as selfish, where self-care is seen as indulgent, and where putting ourselves first is seen as putting our children last. But here's the revolutionary truth I want you to consider today. Loving yourself more than your children isn't about loving them less. It's about loving yourself enough to show them what real love looks like. It's about filling your own cup so full that love overflows naturally to them rather than trying to pour from an empty vessel. When I say love yourself more than your children, I'm not suggesting you should be selfish or neglectful. I'm suggesting something far more radical and transformative. That you should become so full of love for yourself that loving others becomes as natural as breathing. That you should become so comfortable in your own worth that you don't need to prove it through constant sacrifice. That you should become so at peace with your own being that you can truly be present with your children rather than constantly doing for them. This is where true transformation begins. This is where the magic happens. This is where we start to understand that the greatest gift we can give our children isn't our sacrifice. It's our wholeness. Let me tell you about Maria, a single mother I met in Chicago back in 2010. She came to me after one of my lectures, tears streaming down her face, and shared something that broke my heart. She said, "I've spent the last 15 years being the perfect mother. I've attended every school event, chaperoned every field trip, helped with every homework assignment. I put my children's needs before mine every single day. And yesterday, my 13-year-old daughter looked me in the eye and said, 'Hi, Mom, I don't want to grow up to be like you. You're not happy.'" That moment of brutal honesty from a child's perspective tells us everything we need to know about what our children really need from us. They don't need our perfection. They need our authenticity. They don't need our constant presence. They need our genuine essence. You see, what we often forget is that our children are watching us. They're not just listening to what we say, they're absorbing who we are. Every sigh of resignation, every moment of martyrdom, every instance of self-neglect becomes a lesson. They internalize about their own worth, about what love looks like, about what they should expect from life. What if the greatest act of love you could show your children isn't sacrificing yourself for them, but rather showing them how to love themselves through your example? I remember counseling a couple in 1992, and let's call them Robert and Linda. They were proud that they hadn't been on a date night in 8 years because they were so dedicated to their children. They spent every weekend at their kids' sporting events, every evening helping with homework, every vacation at Disney World. They thought they were showing their children love. But when their teenage son started having anxiety attacks, do you know what he said in therapy? He said he felt responsible for his parents' unhappiness. He felt guilty that they had no life outside. How many of you can relate to this? How many of you have put your own dreams on hold, your own joy on pause, your own growth on the back burner, all in the name of being a good parent? But here's the truth that might shake you to your core. Your children don't want to be the source of your happiness. They don't want to be the reason you gave up on your dreams. They don't want to be the excuse you use for not loving yourself. That's too heavy a burden for any child to bear. In my years of counseling and teaching, I've noticed a disturbing pattern. The parents who sacrifice everything for their children often raise adults who either repeat the same pattern of self-sacrifice or rebel against it entirely. Either way, they struggle to find a healthy balance in their own lives. Let me share something personal with you. When my own children were young, I made a decision that seemed radical at the time. I decided to love myself first. I decided to pursue my passion for writing and teaching, even when it meant spending time away from them. I decided to take care of my physical and spiritual health, even when it meant saying no to some of their requests. I decided to model what it looks like to be a whole, fulfilled human being who happens to also be a parent. And you know what happened? My children didn't feel less loved. They felt more secure because they weren't trying to fill an empty vessel. They weren't trying to complete an incomplete person. They were basking in the overflow of a parent who had learned to love themselves first. Let me tell you about exercise I did with a group of children once. I asked them to draw what they thought love looked like. Do you know what most of them drew? They drew smiling faces, they drew people dancing, they drew hearts and sunshine and rainbow. Not one child drew a tired parent sacrificing their dreams. Not one child drew someone putting themselves last. Children inherently understand that love should feel good, that it should bring joy, that it should create more life, not less. But somewhere along the way, we adults got it twisted. We started believing that love means sacrifice, that parenting means martyrdom, that giving means depleting ourselves. We've created a culture where parents compete over who can give up more of themselves, who can be more exhausted, who can sacrifice more completely. And in doing so, we've created a generation of children who believe that's what love looks like. We've created children who think that when they grow up and have their own families, they too must erase themselves. We've created a cycle of self-neglect disguised as love. But what if we could break the cycle? What if we could show our children a different way? Imagine for a moment what would happen if you started loving yourself first. Imagine if you started treating yourself with the same tenderness, the same compassion, the same unconditional acceptance that you show your... Imagine if you started speaking to yourself with the same gentle voice you use when your child is hurt. Imagine if you started protecting your dreams with the same fierce dedication you use to protect their futures. I can hear some of you thinking, but isn't that selfish? Aren't we supposed to put our children first? And to that, I say, the most selfish thing you can do is deprive your children of seeing what healthy self-love looks like. The most selfish thing you can do is teach them that when they become parents, they too must become martyrs. Let me share a powerful truth with you. Your children don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. They don't need you to sacrifice everything. They need you to show them how to live full. They don't need you to dim your light. They need you to show them how to shine. Think about it this way. When you're on a long journey, do you continuously drive your car until it runs out of gas, or do you make sure to fill up the tank regularly? When you're working in your garden, do you water the flowers until your well runs dry, or do you ensure there's a sustainable source of water? Why then do we think it's noble to parent until we're completely depleted? Walk to another part of the stage. I worked with a woman in Seattle. Let's call her Patricia. She came to me completely burnt out, running on empty, barely holding it together. She had 3 children under the age of 10, and she prided herself on being there for every moment of their lives. She never missed a school event, never said no to a play date, never took time for herself. She thought she was being the perfect mother. But then one day, she collapsed from exhaustion. And do you know what her 8-year-old daughter said when she visited her in the hospital? She said, "Mommy, I don't want all the cupcakes and play dates. I just want you to be okay." Out in the dusty plains of New Mexico, I once met a Native American elder who shared with me a profound teaching about love. She said, "In our tradition, we believe that each person is born with a song in their heart. If a mother silences her own song to sing only for her children, the Great Spirit weeps, for the world has lost a sacred melody, and the children have lost their first teacher of how to sing their own song." This wisdom strikes at the very heart of what we're discussing today. When we silence our own song in the name of parenting, we're not just losing ourselves, we're teaching our children that their songs too must one day be silenced when they become parents. I remember counseling a father in Boston. We'll call him Michael. He was a talented musician who gave up his music completely when his first child was born. He thought he was doing the responsible thing, the loving thing. 20 years later, his daughter, now a mother herself, came to one of my seminars in tears. She said, "All my life I dreamed of being a painter, but now that I have children, I'm putting away my brushes, just like my father put away his guitar." The legacy of self-sacrifice had been passed down disguised as good parenting. But here's what Michael never understood, and what so many of us fail to grasp. Our talents, our passions, our joy, these aren't frivolous extras to be discarded when we become parents. They're essential pieces of who we are. And when we deny these parts of ourselves, we're not just diminishing our own lives. We're showing our children that their essential selves are expendable too. Let me tell you about an experiment I conducted in my workshops throughout the early 2000s. I would ask parents to write down their deepest desires, their unrealized dreams, their postponed passions. Then I'd ask them to write down what they hoped their children would do with their own dreams and passions when they grew up. The contradiction was always stark and stunning. While they wanted their children to chase their dreams fearlessly, to live fully, to never give up on their passions, these same parents had convinced themselves that abandoning their own dreams was somehow a noble act of parenting. You see, we've created this false dichotomy where we believe we must choose between being good parents and being fully realized human beings. We've bought into the myth that love means sacrifice, that parenting means martyrdom, that giving means self-erasure. But what if this entire paradigm is backward? What if the greatest gift you can give your children is not your sacrifice, but your wholeness? What if the most powerful legacy you can leave them is not what you give up for them, but what you dare to become despite all the challenges of parenting? I worked with a mother in Philadelphia. Let's call her Rachel. She was a trained dancer who hadn't danced in 7 years because she thought being a good mother meant giving up everything else. One day, her 6-year-old daughter found an old video of her performing. The look of wonder in her daughter's eyes as she watched her mother dance, really dance, with passion and joy and absolute presence, was transformative. That night, Rachel signed up for dance classes again. 6 months later, her daughter told her teacher, "When I grow up, I want to be like my mom, someone who follows her dreams and takes care of her family." This is the kind of legacy we should be leaving our children. Not the legacy of martyrdom, but the legacy of wholeness. Not the example of sacrifice, but the example of self-love that's so abundant it naturally overflows to others. Think about the messages we send our children through our actions. When we constantly put ourselves last, what are we teaching them about their own worth? When we ignore our needs, what are we teaching them about self-care? When we abandon our dreams, what are we teaching them about the value of their own aspirations? I remember a profound moment in 2014 when I was speaking at a conference. A woman stood up and shared something that silenced the entire room. She said, "I realize I've been teaching my daughters that being a mother means becoming invisible. I've been showing them that being a woman means slowly disappearing. And suddenly I understood my self-neglect isn't an act of love. It's a lesson I never meant to teach." This is the heart of what we're talking about today. Every act of self-love or self-neglect becomes a lesson our children absorb. Every time we honor or dishonor our own needs, we're teaching them about their own worth. Every time we pursue or abandon our dreams, we're showing them what's possible or impossible in their own lives. And here's something even more profound to consider. So when you love yourself first, when you fill your own cup until it overflows, you're not just changing your own life. You're changing the lives of generations to come. Because your children will learn, not from your words, but from your example. They'll learn not from what you tell them about self-love, but from how you demonstrate it. I worked with a woman in Miami, we'll call her Sophia. She spent years trying to be the perfect mother, which to her meant being available to her children 24/7, never saying no, never taking time for herself. She was exhausted, depleted, and secretly resentful. Then one day, her teenager daughter wrote in her diary, which she intentionally left open for her mother to find, I'm afraid of growing up and having children because looking at mom, it seems like being a mother means you have to stop being yourself. That entry changed Sophia's life. She realized that in trying to give her children everything, she was actually giving them a devastating message about their own future. She started making changes, small at first, then bigger ones. She went back to school. She started practicing yoga. She began setting boundaries and taking time for herself. And something magical happened. Her children didn't feel less loved. Instead, they felt more secure because they were seeing what it looks like to love yourself while loving others. What I'm about to share with you now might be difficult to hear, but it's a truth that needs to be spoken. Sometimes our excessive focus on our children isn't really about love at all. It's about fear. Fear that we're not good enough. Fear that we're not doing enough. Fear that if we take care of ourselves, somehow our children will suffer. Let me tell you about David, a successful executive I worked with in 2013. He prided himself on never missing a single one of his son's baseball games. He rearranged million-dollar deals, postponed crucial meetings, even risked his job, all to maintain his perfect attendance record. On the surface, this looked like dedication. But when we dug deeper, we discovered something profound. David's own father had abandoned him when he was young, and his excessive presence in his son's life wasn't about being there for his son. It was about proving he wasn't his father. This is what happens when we parent from a place of fear rather than love. We overcompensate, we overdo, we overwhelm. And in doing so, we often create the very problems we're trying to avoid. I've seen this pattern repeat itself countless times in my work. The mother who never says no to her children because she's afraid they won't love her. The father who sacrifices his health working endless hours because he's afraid his children will go without. The parent who gives up all their friendships because they're afraid something will happen to their child if they're not watching every second. These are radical truths that your children don't need your fear. They need your wholeness. They don't need your perfection. They need your authenticity. They don't need your constant presence. They need your genuine essence. I remember working with a mother in Vancouver. Let's call her Elizabeth. She came to me devastated because her 12-year-old son had told her something heartbreaking. He said, sometimes I wish you would just go away and do something for yourself. Because when you're always here, always watching, always waiting, it makes me feel like I'm responsible for your happiness. Children are incredibly perceptive. They know when our attention comes from love and when it comes from fear. They can tell when our presence is genuine and when it's compulsive. They understand often better than we do when we're using them to fill our own emotional voids. In my decades of working with families, I've noticed something fascinating. The parents who are most afraid of damaging their children are often the ones who do the most damage. Not through neglect or abuse, but through suffocation disguised as love. They hover so close that their children never learn to trust themselves. They protect so fiercely that their children never develop resilience. They give so completely that their children never learn the value of earning or the importance of boundaries. I worked with a family in Atlanta where the mother had turned herself into a human surveillance system for her teenagers. She monitored every text, tracked every movement, questioned every decision. She thought she was keeping them safe. Instead, she was teaching them that they couldn't be trusted, that the world was too dangerous for them to navigate on their own, that they were incapable of making good decisions without her constant oversight. This isn't love, it's control wrapped in the package of care. And it stems from our own unresolved fears, our own unhealed wounds, our own unloved parts. Sometimes when we say we're doing everything for our children, what we're really doing is avoiding doing the work on ourselves. It's easier to focus on their homework than to face our own unfulfilled dreams. It's easier to manage their social lives than to confront our own loneliness. It's easier to fix their problems than to address our own challenges. I remember counseling a woman in 2008. We'll call her Margaret. She spent every waking moment orchestrating her children's lives, their activities, their play dates, their hobbies, their futures. When I asked her about her own life, she broke down crying. She hadn't thought about her own desires, her own dreams, her own needs in so long that she couldn't even remember what they were. She had used her children as an escape from her own life, and in doing so, she had become a cautionary tale for them rather than an inspiration. This brings us to a crucial understanding. The greatest gift you can give your children isn't your sacrifice. It's your evolution. It's not your protection. It's your growth. It's not your constant presence. It's your genuine presence. When you dare to love yourself first, when you dare to honor your own needs, when you dare to pursue your own dreams, you're not taking anything away from your children. Instead, you're giving them something priceless, permission to do the same in their own lives. I worked with a father in Detroit who made a remarkable decision. After 15 years of working in a job he hated because it provided good benefits for his family, he's decided to start his own business, something he dreamed of doing for years. His wife was terrified. His friends thought he was being selfish. But his 10-year-old daughter said something profound. She said, Daddy, I'm proud of you for being brave. You see, when you love yourself enough to honor your dreams, you teach your children that their dreams matter too. When you love yourself enough to set healthy boundaries, you teach your children that they have the right to set boundaries too. When you love yourself enough to take care of your own needs, you teach your children that their needs are valid too. But this kind of love, this radical self-love that overflows to our children rather than depleting us, requires tremendous courage. It requires us to face our fears, to challenge our conditioning, to question everything we've been taught about what makes a good parent. I remember working with a single mother in 2012. Oh man, just call her Anna. She had been raised to believe that good mothers always put their children first, no matter what. She worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, never took a day off. She was exhausted, depressed, and slowly dying inside. One day, her 9-year-old daughter drew a picture of their family. In it, the mother was represented by a gray cloud with a sad face. When Anna saw that drawing, she realized that in trying to give her daughter everything, she had actually been giving her a brittle, depleted version of a mother instead of a vibrant, fulfilled one. Let me share something deeply personal with you. In 1974, I was working with a group of parents who were all struggling with this same challenge, how to balance their own needs with their children's needs. One mother said something that changed my entire perspective on parent. She said, I realized that by trying to be everything to my children, I had become nothing to myself. And a mother who is nothing to herself can never be anything meaningful to her children. That's the paradox we've been exploring today. The more we sacrifice ourselves for our children, the less we actually have to give them. The more we deny our own light, the less we can illuminate their path. The more we abandon ourselves, the less of us there is for them to truly know and love. I worked with a family in Boston where the mother had developed what she called her Martyr's Manual of Parenting. She took pride in never sitting down to eat until everyone else had finished, never buying new clothes for herself while her children had the latest fashions, never taking a vacation while making sure her children had every opportunity. She thought she was teaching them about sacrifice and love. Instead, she was teaching them about self-neglect and martyrdom. One day, her 16-year-old daughter came to her in tears and said something that shattered her world. Ma, I don't want to grow up to be like you. I don't want to disappear. That's when she realized she hadn't been modeling love. Think about the oxygen mask principle we discussed earlier. Airlines don't tell you to put your mask on first because they want you to be selfish. They tell you because they understand a fundamental truth. You cannot help others if you've passed out from lack of oxygen. Yet in parenting, we consistently ignore this principle. We try to give our children oxygen while we're gasping for air ourselves. I remember counseling a father in 2014. Let's call him Thomas. He had given up his passion for writing when his first child was born, believing that good fathers don't have time for hobbies. 15 years later, his son found his old notebooks filled with stories and asked him why he stopped writing. Thomas had no good answer. That's when he realized he hadn't just given up writing. He'd given up a part of himself that could have inspired his son. Here's a truth that might revolutionize your parenting. Your children don't want your sacrifice. They want your joy. They don't want your martyrdom. They want your aliveness. They don't want your constant service. They want your authentic presence. I worked with a mother in Seattle who spent years feeling guilty about taking time for herself. She would literally hide in the bathroom to meditate, feeling ashamed of needing those few moments of peace. One day, her 7-year-old daughter caught her, and instead of being upset, said, "Oh, Mommy, I like it when you meditate. Your eyes look happier afterward." Children are wise beyond our understanding. They don't want parents who are martyrs to their cause. They want parents who show them how to live fully, love deeply, and honor themselves while caring for others. Let me share a powerful story that brings this all together. In 2011, I met a woman, we'll call her Grace, who had been diagnosed with cancer. She spent 15 years being the perfect mother, putting everyone else's needs before her own, ignoring her own body's signals, dismissing her own intuition. During her recovery, she had an epiphany that she shared with me. I realized that by teaching my children that love means self-sacrifice, I was teaching them to ignore their own bodies, their own needs, their own wisdom. My cancer became their lesson. And what happens when you don't love yourself enough to listen to yourself? This is the legacy we're really leaving our children when we don't love ourselves enough. We're not just hurting ourselves. We're programming them to repeat our patterns of self-neglect, our cycles of martyrdom, our habits of self-erasure. But there's another way. There's a path of radical self-love that doesn't diminish our love for our children, but rather enhances it. There's a way of being that shows our children what it looks like to be both a loving parent and a fully realized human being. Imagine a generation of children raised by parents who love themselves deeply and authentically. Imagine children who see their mothers pursuing their dreams, honoring their needs, celebrating their achievements. Imagine children who watch their fathers take care of their physical and emotional health, maintain their friendships, nurture their passions. These children won't feel less loved because their parents love themselves. They'll feel more secure, more inspired, more empowered. They'll learn that love doesn't require self-erasure. They'll understand that giving doesn't mean depleting oneself. They'll know in their bones that being a parent doesn't mean stopping being a person. We close today. I want to leave you with this thought. The greatest gift you can give your children is not your sacrifice. It's your wholeness. The greatest legacy you can leave them is not what you give up for them. It's who you dare to become despite all the challenges of parenting. Your children don't need you to be a martyr to their cause. They need you to be a model of what it looks like to love yourself while loving others. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. They don't need you to give up everything for them. They need you to show them how to live fully while caring deeply. So today, right now, I invite you to make a radical choice. Choose to love yourself more. Choose to honor your needs. Choose to pursue your dreams. Choose to fill your own cup until it overflows naturally to your children. Choose to be the person you want your children to become. Because in the end, your children will not do what you say. They will do what you do. They will not become who you tell them to be. They will become who you show them to be. And if you want them to love themselves, to honor themselves, to be fully themselves while loving others, you must lead the way. This is the revolution in parenting that we need. This is the transformation that can heal generations of self-neglect disguised as love. This is the path to raising children who don't need to recover from their childhoods, but can instead build upon the foundation of wholeness and self-love that you modeled for them. The time has come to love yourself more than your children, not because you love them less, but because this is how you love them best. This is how you show them what real love looks like. This is how you set them free to love themselves too. Remember, your children are not looking for a perfect parent. They're looking for an authentic one. They don't need your sacrifice. They need your truth. They don't need your constant service. They need your genuine presence. And most importantly, they don't need you to love yourself less. They need you to love yourself more. The choice is yours. The time is now. Your children are watching. What will you show them about love?